one of the Christian monks captured at Lindisfarne, who is enslaved by Ragnar Lothbrok, Athelstan eventually turns into Ragnar Lothbrok's best friend according to this series. Now, I speculate that maybe he could be based on another Athelstan, which I'd probably interpret to be Athelstan, the son of Athelwulf, as it's said in the Wikia that he had 4 brothers and an unnamed sister. And the only Athelstan I knew about that was Athelstan, the son of Athelwulf, only they don't portray him as the son of Athelwulf. And there's no way that he would have probably gone to be a monk at Lindisfarne if he was the son of Athelwulf. But that's making things a bit more complicated. And the historical accuracy among this is that slaves were treated brutally. They were treated horribly by the Scandinavians. And even Athelstan notices this, and this gives a bit of cultural authenticity. But in the process, he notices that Ragnar Lothbrok doesn't mistreat him at all. But then Ragnar Lothbrok uses Athelstan to get the knowledge of England and Northumbria so that he could lead a more profitable raid. But, of course, Haraldson, rather than award Ragnar for his initiative, punishes him by stealing all the plunder and allows everyone who went on that raid to only take 1 item with them. Ragnar, of course, chooses Athelstan as his slave. And so, in the process, with the second raid of Northumbria and Lagertha going with them, he eventually entrusts Athelstan himself to look after his children while he is away. But his oldest son, Bjorn Ironsides, does not like that idea at all. Which is super ironic because in the sagas, Bjorn Ironsides was not the son of Lagertha, but the son of Ragnar Lothbrok's other wife, Auslog. But we'll get to that in a minute. And I like the fact that with Ragnar Lothbrok's growing fame and popularity among his clan, among the people of Kattegat, he's making enemies from within and outside Kattegat. Because then Earl Haraldson is jealous of his popularity and creates in his mind a myth that Ragnar is plotting to overthrow him and become Earl of Kattegat. But suspicions like this were not uncommon, as these Scandinavian nations, before Christianity came, were essentially failed states. When the king died, they would eventually fall into anarchy. The king practically was the state, and then somebody else would have to muscle their way into becoming the next king. Because that's how bad things were. They were either a dictatorship or an anarchy in a failed state. A lot like modern-day Somalia today. And the other enemy that he seems to make is, of course, the king of Northumbria, King Aella. Now, is this accurate to show Aella at this particular time, at the turn of the century, from the 7 to the 800s, as the king of Northumbria? Well, not really. The king of Northumbria, during the first Viking raid at Lindisfarne, the first Viking raid on Northumbria, of course, which was technically the second in one of the English kingdoms. But anyways, the first king was actually Athelred I of Northumbria, and Aella wouldn't become king until much later on. But does this inaccuracy bother me? Well, for one, it's not a very historically accurate show, but this is what I deem to be creative licensing done right, especially as it is foreshadowing the rivalry and the oncoming end of Ragnar Lothbrok himself. Now, the Viking series depicts King Aella of Northumbria as a ruthless dictator and a tyrant who kills his own captains and generals for failing to actually take out Ragnar Lothbrok and his men, as they become practically a thorn in his side. And to tell the truth, I'm not sure what his intelligence was like. I mean, he and Osbert did get themselves outsmarted at the Battle of York by Ivar the Boneless and Ubba, both sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. But in the process, it is accurate to show him as a tyrant, at least to the best of our knowledge, because the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle itself, the Anglo-Saxon sources have described him as a dictator, a tyrant, and an illegitimate king, a usurper who usurped the throne from the rightful king of Osbert. Eventually, Earl Haraldsson's jealousy gets the best of him, and then he launches an all-out attack against Ragnar Lothbrok and his farm workers. Ragnar survives, but all of his farm workers are butchered. But who comes to his aid? His wife, his children, and his slave/best friend Athelstan, which is super ironic. Eventually, Ragnar Lothbrok challenges Earl Haraldsson in a duel to the death. Now, in order to keep his power, and also to make sure no one else challenges his power into being seen as a coward and weak by the rest of the populace, he basically has no choice but to accept the challenge from Ragnar. Ragnar does this, one, because he's protecting his family as they were threatened, and two, because he knows how to play politics even as a simple farmer. Though he's actually not quite simple, he's actually quite clever. And in the process of this duel, well, if you've seen the series, it is easy to guess what happens then. Now, there is no historical evidence that there was an Earl Haraldsson who attempted to kill Ragnar Lothbrok, at least not by what I've researched, but here it demonstrates the culture and worldview of the Vikings, or rather Scandinavians, perfectly, especially as Earl Haraldsson is defeated by Ragnar Lothbrok. Then Ragnar ends up taking all the power that Earl Haraldsson once has in the city-state of Kattegat. And that is accurate because they were a warrior society. They didn't pass things down from like father to son, or sometimes they would, but if one could challenge and overthrow the leader, then they would become the new leader, which that's the structure in a warrior society, which sadly in our modern vernacular is technically showing to be a failed state. So then, as Earl, Ragnar ends up getting a request from a noble warrior who wants the chance to die with honor in battle, named Tostig, and he accepts this. And it also goes to show that every strategy that Ayla uses to try and repel Ragnar fails. So it shows that Ayla is not very bright. Either that or Ragnar is a very keen strategist, or both. And so then he tries to make an agreement with Ayla that one of his men will become a Christian in order for him to receive an agreement for payment from King Ayla in order to leave the Kingdom of Northumbria. This alternate storyline, Rollo agrees to be baptized, and Rollo is basically the brother of Ragnar Lothbrok, which of course is alternate history. In real life, the only relation they had to each other, Rollo and Ragnar, was that they were ethnically Scandinavian, probably both descended from Odin. But in reality, they were not biological brothers. Now, of course, Rollo only takes this as a joke and isn't really sincere in his conversion, and it later on makes Floki upset because Floki, in his mind, has this conception that Rollo has committed a foul sin. And I would agree with him, even though I am a Christian. And when a pagan and a Christian can agree on something like that, you know somebody's done something wrong. But of course, Ayla didn't have any intention of keeping his promise of giving him the payment, and while trying to trap Ragnar, ends up getting his men trapped themselves. which shows the ingenious tactics of Ragnar Lothbrok. So then, ultimately, it shows Ayla developing and holding a bitter grudge against Ragnar for what he did, and says that he vows war eternal on Ragnar Lothbrok, and that is important. And it is also historical foreshadowing. And I would say, since they're doing alternate history, that is alternate history done right in the process. And sadly, Ragnar returns home to find out that his child has just been miscarried. And in the process, that's not the only bad news, is Athelstan is losing faith in Christ and wondering if he believes in the Norse Scandinavian gods. And thus we come to something that is very important for Season 2, as they later on head to Uppsala, up in Sweden, on a religious pilgrimage for the Germanic pagans, and thus they are going to make a lot of sacrifices. Ragnar doesn't tell Athelstan, but he intends to sacrifice him only if the gods accept it, basically. Here's one of the errors that I cannot take seriously, how they portray Uppsala. Uppsala being a temple out in the middle of the mountains, when really the city of Uppsala is on flat terrain in Sweden. There are some other issues that I have with the show, but we'll get to some of the other issues that I have with Season 1 and the show in general after I explain a lot of what's so good about the show.